Classical Hollywood cinema is a term that refers to a time period where Hollywood was gaining both domestic and international recognition, also experiencing a growing market demands for film. The historical event is otherwise known as the Golden Age of Hollywood. It started around the late 1920s and lasted until the early 1960s. This era signifies the rise of massive Hollywood studios and the beginning of the most common style of storytelling in the history of cinema, which is the three-act structure. More on that later. This phenomenon contributed to modern contemporary films. Technicolor and sound recording system were all introduced in the span of this age of cinema history, thus influenced many great directors, scriptwriters, and editors even today. Three-act narrative structure is a framework, backbone if you will, for every story in the classical Hollywood cinema, even Hollywood today. Beginning Act 1, middle Act 2, and the end Act 3. In most scripts, it goes like this, quote, "A character wants something badly, but having a hard time getting it," end quote. You see, the hero or heroine has a goal, but will be faced with a conflict against the antagonist. A film that follows this religiously is The Wizard of Oz. Dorothy gets taken by a tornado inciting incident, and then she wants to go back home, which is the main goal and the future conflict. So she goes on to a journey and meet new friends, which is Act 2. Then she asks for help from Dr. Oz, but turns out he's a scam. This is the climax. She realizes she can't go home, low point. In the end, she wakes up and realizes everything that is a dream, which is the resolution. You see, before this, filmmakers are still experimenting on these art form eras such as French Impressionism, German Expressionism, and Soviet montage. You see, self-expression was very important to people back then, but sadly sometimes it can be very individualistic and personal. Art was more subjective. Many audience members could not connect to the film as deeply as the person who made the film, especially French Impressionism and other experimental films such as Napoleon, Abel Ganche, 1927, which uses visual elements through cinematography, mise-en-scène, and editing to communicate and give meaning. One technique that's common is called superimposing or superimposition, where the opacity is reduced and two images is stacked into one. A big critic is that films in the old eras have little to no cohesive narrative. There is a story in films like these, but isn't as visible or easily digested as well as classical Hollywood cinema era. And they don't say it through dialogue, yet only through impositions. They just hint and give strong suggestions to show the story, such as in one scene in Napoleon where Napoleon himself is invading other countries. Instead of showing a huge battle, Abel Ganche just superimposed Napoleon's eyes with maps, which is very different compared to classical Hollywood cinema and three-act structure. Other contributions of classical Hollywood cinema era are advancements or discoveries made through editing. One of the big achievements is continuity editing, which consists of 180-degree rule, 30-degree rule, cross-cutting, and actual cutting. This era also produced new genres. The goal for 130 and 30-degree techniques is to orient the audience and prevent disruption caused by cutting between shots to keep the illusion of film. Continuity editing is a preferred style of editing during this time. Makes sure the story makes sense and looks smooth to make audiences forget that they are watching a film. Jumping to today's eras of films such as The Dark Knight, Christopher Nolan 2008, in which he broke the 180-degree rule to disorient the audience. However, in order to break it, one must master it. Christopher Nolan had a vision because there has to be a strong purpose in order to challenge the rules. In one scene where the Joker is being interrogated by Batman, the camera angle changes from Batman's right shoulder cut to his left shoulder, which creates an almost mirroring effect, resulting in a feeling of uneasiness, symbolizing that though these are enemies, they are actually quite similar, tied together. When a scriptwriter or director knows in detail about the structure, only then he or she can operate outside of the format. A perfect example of that is No Country for Old Men by Coen Brothers 2007. The film's Act 1 and Act 2 follows the stereotypical guidelines, but when Llewellyn Moss, the protagonist, is killed off-screen by minor characters, not even by Anton Chigurh, the antagonist, confusion happens. Moss was killed before the film even reaching Act 3. Even worse, audiences didn't see how he died. Then suddenly it changes perspective to Sheriff Bell, which makes audiences feel uncomfortable. This is not how stories are supposed to go. The Coens also challenged the Western genre. In most classic westerns, the protagonist will face against the antagonist in a final duel as the climax. Yet this doesn't happen in the film, hence why many critics say that this is a modern western. Nowadays, 21st century, there is a trend of directors working around the Hollywood format while still adapting it, yet modifying it completely. Pulp Fiction, Quentin Tarantino 1994, and Memento, Christopher Nolan 2000 are great examples of non-linear storytelling and not following the three-act structure. But these films don't just exist out of thin air. These directors are inspired by previous films such as Citizen Kane by Orson Welles. You see, Citizen Kane has a non-linear timeline, which influenced Pulp Fiction and Memento. One big characteristic is that time in classical Hollywood is continuous, linear, and uniform. The only way to manipulate time in a film is by using flashbacks. Memento started from the end and end from the beginning. Pulp Fiction has different protagonists and story arcs while going linear and then backwards. Citizen Kane also challenged the rules. Orson Welles was pioneering a visual aesthetic unlike anything. Take lighting, for example. Directors and cinematographers use light and shadow as a visual storytelling technique. That's all because Orson Welles. Back then, when most Hollywood films uses light out of necessity to light actors, sets, to make it visible, Orson Welles used light to create meaning and to express emotions, making the shot more dynamic and have more depth. Deep focus was another one. Back then, when actors were the center point and everything around them, such as the set, is blurred out, Orson ignored this and said that the mise-en-scène should be in focus and is as important as the actors, which created the classic foreground, midground, and background shot. The third contribution is camera placement. Orson created new camera angles such as low angle. Rather than using shot and reverse shot, close-up, Orson Welles decided to use wide shots and long continuous takes instead of cutting to a different shot. Welles blocked his actors and moved the cameras to create a different shots within the same take. Raiders of the Lost Ark is directly inspired by it. That was a lot of discoveries and inventions, wasn't it? You know, you're probably wondering, what else did classical Hollywood cinema era change? Well, for one, it influenced New Hollywood, which is the next movement. And films such as Wizard of Oz inspired a lot of directors. You see, the story proved that film isn't just for a medium for realism, but it could be used to explore dreams and fantasy. Popular films such as Avatar, highest grossing movie of all time, Finding Nemo, Monsters Inc., Toy Story, and almost all animated films still uses three-act structure. Despite being decades apart from the classical Hollywood cinema era, they are still using it. So, in conclusion, classical Hollywood cinema era is a crucial time in history for filmmaking. Without it, films today would look and feel drastically dissimilar. The development of three-act, continuity editing, fantasy genres, Technicolor, and sound recording was just discovered and invented at the right place and at the right time, hence boosting Hollywood to become a worldwide brand and setting a standard to all films. In addition, without the three-act rule being put in the first place, filmmakers cannot break it in the first place. This structure influence and inspire new generations of directors. Without it, popular films such as Avatar and The Avengers will not exist. But especially films that challenges this notion, challenges the three-act structure, films such as Pulp Fiction will have never make it past pre-production.